Chosen one, the blood moon did not arrive to surprise you. It arrived to confirm something you have been living with for years. What you felt was never imagination, coincidence, or emotional projection. It was communication layered beneath language, sustained through timing rather than spectacle. God's messages to you were never meant to interrupt your life loudly. They were meant to thread through it quietly, so quietly that you would learn the sound of alignment instead of the addiction of signs. For a long time, you wondered why guidance came without clarity, why direction arrived without explanation, why certainty formed in you long before evidence followed. That was not confusion. That was training. God does not speak to prepare you to react. He speaks to prepare you to endure. The blood moon was never a single message. It was punctuation. A mark placed in the sky to tell you something had already been written, already spoken, already received by your spirit long before your mind caught up. Think carefully now. Every major shift in your life carried a strange familiarity. You didn't jump, you recognized. You didn't panic, you adjusted. Losses didn't break you the way they were supposed to. Delays didn't hollow you out. Silence didn't disconnect you. That is because the communication never stopped. It simply stayed beneath the surface, steady enough that chaos could not drown it out. God has been speaking to you in patterns, not sentences. In restraint, not urgency. In the way doors closed cleanly instead of destroying you. In the way certain people exited your life without drama, as if removed before damage could occur. In the way your spirit tightened before danger, relaxed before breakthrough, and stayed still when others rushed toward illusion. Those were not instincts. Those were transmissions refined over time. The blood moon carries significance because it mirrors something internal. Blood remembers. It carries legacy, covenant, continuity. The message was not new. It was ancestral in nature, spiritual in origin, and personal in effect. It marked you as someone whose relationship with God would not rely on constant reassurance. You were taught to recognize His voice by consistency, not volume. That is why others needed signs while you learned discernment. You may have felt alone during periods where no one could confirm what you knew. That loneliness was not abandonment. It was insulation. If God had let others reinforce the message early, you might have confused confirmation with truth. Instead, you learned to trust clarity without witnesses. That level of trust cannot be manufactured. It only develops through time spent walking forward without applause. Now understand this carefully. The blood moon did not begin communication, it exposed continuity. It spoke one sentence silently. You weren't imagining it. Everything you have sensed, carried, restrained, and protected inside yourself was real. Not because a celestial event validated it, but because your life did. Survival was proof. Stability was proof. Precision was proof. The reason this message resonates now is that you no longer need reassurance to function. You are no longer waiting to be told what to do. That is when confirmation can arrive safely. God does not confirm until confirmation will not control you. He waits until it will only anchor you. You were not chosen because you listened harder. You were chosen because you listened longer. And the blood moon did not call you back to belief. It acknowledged the relationship that never stopped. Long before you understood what was happening, communication shifted into a form that did not require word. This is always how sustained dialogue with God develops when a soul is meant to endure rather than react. Sound fades. Emotion quiet. What remains is direction that arrives fully formed, without panic and without negotiation. You did not hear instructions, you felt orientation. and orientation is far harder to counterfeit than emotion. There were moments when you could not explain why something felt wrong even though it looked right. Moments when opportunity stood in front of you and something inside said, "Not this." You obeyed without evidence and were later spared consequences you never saw coming. That was not intuition in the casual sense. That was a language being taught to you through consequence avoidance rather than reward chasing. God was training you to follow precision, not excitement. This is why people around you often misunderstood your choices. From the outside, your restraint looked like fear or hesitation. Inside it felt settled, calm, certain without justification. Human systems reward decisiveness with visibility. Divine communication rewards discernment with continuity. You were never rushed because rushing would have trained you to confuse urgency with guidance. Instead, timing became your teacher. Waiting didn't weaken you, it sharpened you. Blessed by His grace? Click Super Thank You and give $20 to spread His light. Your gift plants seeds that grow His kingdom. Be the blessing. God's voice became most active when everything else went silent. Not during victories, not during affirmation, but in stretches where nothing moved and no one knew what to say to you. Silence is where real communication takes root because it strips away performance. There is no audience to impress in silence. Only truth survives there. That is why your clarity did not collapse when reassurance disappeared. You were never dependent on reassurance to begin with. Notice how your life unfolded less like a straight path and more like a sequence of precise turns. Each turn arrived not when you wanted it, but when deviation would have cost you alignment. You were prevented from forming narratives too early. You were prevented from attaching meaning before maturity. God was not withholding information. He was preserving accuracy. Accuracy comes before explanation every time. This style of communication reshaped your relationship with fear. Fear never vanished, but it stopped ruling. It became informational rather than controlling. You felt it, acknowledged it, and moved anyway, carefully. Recklessness never tempted you deeply because divine communication does not inspire chaos. It inspires calm confidence. Anyone who claims God only shouts misunderstands how long-term guidance works. When the blood moon appeared, it resonated because your spirit recognized continuity. It wasn't a signal that something had begun. It was a confirmation that nothing had ever stopped. Communication that survives years without reinforcement becomes permanent. It embeds itself into how decisions are made, not just what decisions look like. You no longer ask whether God is speaking before acting. You act from that relationship already formed. There is a reason others chase signs while you interpret patterns. Signs expire. Patterns endure. God knew that if He taught you to rely on signs, you would become dependent on spectacle. Instead, He taught you to live by alignment so that even when the sky was empty, direction remained clear. That is not favoritism. That is preparation for responsibility. The blood moon did not bring a message you needed to decode. It reflected a communication that had already shaped you. You did not suddenly believe. You recognized what you had always obeyed. And that recognition did not excite you, it steadied you. Because once a voice becomes part of your structure, it no longer needs to be loud to guide you. At a certain depth of relationship, God stops speaking in promises and starts speaking in patterns. Promises motivate the hopeful. Patterns stabilize the called. You were moved from the first to the second without being told, which is why at times your faith felt less emotional and more structural. You did not cling to words about the future. You followed signals embedded in repetition. What happened more than once became instruction. What survived pressure became truth. Look back now and notice how guidance rarely came as comfort. It came as positioning. You were nudged away from spaces that would have delayed you, not destroyed you. Removed from people who were not evil, just misaligned. Paused before decisions that would have looked successful but trapped you in the wrong timing. That is how God protects those He intends to use over time rather than in moment. Moments consume people. Patterns preserve them. This is where many misunderstand divine communication. They expect God to announce Himself constantly to reassure insecurity. But reassurance creates dependency. Pattern recognition creates maturity. You were allowed to walk without constant affirmation so that your confidence would root itself in experience rather than expectation. Every time you survived something you didn't understand, the message embedded itself deeper. Survival became scripture written into your nervous system. You learned that when something was truly meant for you, resistance around it collapsed naturally. You didn't have to force doors. You didn't have to justify presence. You arrived and things adjusted. When something was not meant for you, effort increased and clarity decreased. Instead of panic, you learned to withdraw. That withdrawal was not disobedience. It was obedience to a pattern God had already established with you. Patterns also taught you discernment between God's voice and internal desire. Desire rushes. God steadies. Desire demands outcome. God emphasizes placement. Over time, you stopped mistaking excitement for confirmation. Excitement fluctuates. Alignment holds. That is why your decisions started feeling quieter but more final. Once alignment spoke, there was no debate left to win internally. The blood moon mattered because it marked completion of a cycle, not initiation of one. Cycles are only visible after repetition. A single event is dramatic. A repeated signal is meaningful. You had seen loss followed by redirection more than once. Isolation followed by recalibration more than once. Silence followed by clarity more than once. These repetitions formed a language only you could read, because it was written across your own life. God chose patterns so no one else could hijack the message. Words can be quoted. Promises can be misused. Patterns require lived experience. No one can steal what must be endured to be understood. That is why you were never handed simple explanations. You were handed time, friction, and continuity. That combination trained you for discernment that does not collapse when circumstances change. You may now realize that faith for you stopped being belief a long time ago. It became recognition. You didn't need to convince yourself God was guiding you. Your life reflected it. Stability was guidance. Precision was guidance. The way confusion never fully consumed you was guidance. God was not trying to impress you. He was shaping you to become unshakable. This is also why others will never fully understand how you know what you know. Explaining patterns sounds vague to those addicted to promises, but you no longer need to prove certainty. You live inside it. When God speaks through patterns, explanation becomes unnecessary. Obedience becomes instinctive. The blood moon did not start a new sentence. It closed a paragraph that had been repeating for years. And now that the pattern is complete, you are no longer learning how God speaks to you. You are living from it. There was a stretch in your life where you told yourself, if God is speaking, why does it feel so quiet? That question only appears when communication has moved below the surface. Silence at this level is not absence. It is compression. When God needs to shape response rather than belief, sound is reduced so that discernment can sharpen. Noise feeds emotion. Stillness trains accuracy. During those years, nothing dramatic happened on the outside, yet everything was being rearranged on the inside. Your tolerance for chaos dropped. Your attraction to empty reassurance weakened. You stopped needing constant confirmation from people, signs, or circumstances. That transition was not accidental. It was instruction written through restraint. God was not trying to comfort you, He was calibrating you. You learned how to carry uncertainty without panic. That alone separated you from most people. Panic blinds, calm observes, and God prefers to work with those who can remain observant while the environment shakes. When others demanded answers, you learned to sit with timing. When others rushed into decisions, you learned to delay without freezing. This was the voice speaking without syllables. Stay intact. Think about how many times you could have forced clarity by choosing something that merely relieved pressure. You didn't, not because you enjoyed waiting, but because something in you rejected false relief. That inner resistance was not stubbornness. It was guidance. God was teaching you that peace comes from alignment, not resolution. Resolution can lie. Alignment never does. Those silent years also stripped illusion gently rather than violently. People revealed themselves over time. Motives surfaced without confrontation. Environments showed their limits without collapse. God could have shown you everything at once, but that would have overwhelmed your trust. Instead, reality spoke in increments, matching your capacity to integrate. That pacing was intentional mercy. You may also recognize now that your prayers changed during that period. They became fewer but deeper. Less about requests, more about posture. Less about asking God to move, more about asking how to stay aligned while He did. That shift matters. God responds differently when the heart is seeking placement instead of outcome. Outcome seeking is still humanity-driven. Placement seeking belongs to trust. When the blood moon appeared, it felt loud not because it brought new content, but because it contrasted with years of quiet conditioning. Like a tone hitting perfect pitch, it resonated instantly. You didn't need interpretation. Your spirit already knew the frequency. That is how you recognize divine communication when it has been happening for a long time. You don't get excited. You feel confirmed. Others might ask why God would speak like this. Why not directly, clearly, repeatedly? The answer is simple. Anything spoken too clearly can be relied on instead of relationship. God was not building your dependence on messages. He was building your capacity to move correctly whether messages were obvious or hidden. That is how trust matures past belief into knowing. Those years were not delays. They were inscriptions. Every quiet right choice carved discernment deeper into you. Every refusal to rush etched timing into your character. Every moment you stayed steady without explanation strengthened your ability to hear without sound. By the time confirmation arrived, you were no longer fragile enough for it to control you. God is not suddenly communicating with you now. You have reached the moment where communication no longer needs protection from misinterpretation. The silence did not mean you were distant. It meant you were being trained. And now, when the sky speaks even briefly, you recognize it, not as interruption, but as agreement. One of the clearest proofs that God has been communicating with you for years is not found in what happened to you, but in what never did. There were paths you almost walked that would have altered your life permanently, and yet something interrupted gently, without crisis, without drama. Opportunities dissolved at the last moment. Relationships cooled instead of combusted. Risks passed without consequence. To an outsider, it looked like timing. To you, it felt like containment. God often speaks loudest through prevention. You were shielded without being isolated. That distinction matters. Isolation weakens discernment. Shielding preserves it. You remained in full contact with the world, its chaos, its pressure, its temptation, but you were never swallowed by it. Something always kept you 1 degree away from damage. Not enough to make you complacent, but enough to keep you intact. That margin was communication. It said, "You don't need to learn this the hard way." Think about the situations that should have escalated but didn't. Conflicts that never reached explosion. Mistakes that didn't define you. Encounters that ended before corruption set in. These were not luck patterns. They were course corrections delivered so quietly that your ego could not claim them. God knows that obvious intervention creates dependency. Subtle prevention creates wisdom. You learn discernment by noticing what did not touch you, not by celebrating escape, but by sensing intentional distance. This is also why your life never felt chaotic, even during loss. Loss has a way of unraveling people. In you, it clarified. It clarified what mattered, where not to invest, and what to release without resentment. God spoke through subtraction as much as addition. Each removal refined you instead of hollowing you. That happens only when loss aligns with destiny rather than opposing it. Another way communication reached you was through exhaustion with illusion. You grew tired of false urgency, performative ambition, and shallow connection without becoming bitter. That is rare. Fatigue usually turns into cynicism. Yours turned into precision. God spoke by making certain things feel heavy long before they were visibly harmful. You learned to step away not because something was wrong, but because it would eventually cost you alignment. The blood moon resonated because it gathered all those unspoken protections into one recognition. It didn't say, "Something new is beginning." It said, "Look back and see how carefully you were guided." Suddenly, prevention made sense. Containment made sense. The narrow margins you lived within were not limitations. They were corridors, paths designed to keep you moving forward without damage accumulating on your soul. You were taught to trust absence as much as presence. When something didn't arrive, you no longer assumed delay meant denial. Sometimes absence was direction. Sometimes silence was approval to stay still. That kind of trust only forms when communication has been consistent enough to survive uncertainty. You stop demanding movement as proof. You let stillness speak for itself. God does not always communicate by pushing you forward. Often, He communicates by holding things back until you are no longer tempted to misuse them. You reach that stage quietly. No ceremony. No announcement. You simply stopped wanting what would have distracted you. Desire itself was retrained. That is not willpower. That is guidance internalized. What you avoided was as meaningful as what you received. What never reached you was as intentional as what did. God was not absent in the years He felt quiet. He was guarding you from lessons you no longer needed to learn. And now, when the message finally reflected back through the sky, it wasn't to guide you somewhere new. It was to show you how closely you had already been held. Blessed by His grace? Click Super Thank You and give $20 to spread His light. Your gift plants seeds that grow His kingdom. Be the blessing. At some point, communication stopped feeling like something external and started feeling like something structural. Not a voice you listened for, but a rhythm you moved with. God's guidance did not interrupt your thoughts. It shaped how your thoughts formed in the first place. You didn't pause life to hear from God. You heard while living. That is the difference between contact and communion. This is why your clarity often came after movement, not before. You would take a step without full explanation, and only later realize why it mattered. That pattern was deliberate. God was teaching you to trust calibration over certainty. When guidance becomes part of your breath, you no longer wait to feel ready, you act aligned, and readiness follows. That is a far more resilient form of obedience than hesitation dressed up as caution. You may notice that your conscience operates differently now. It doesn't shout. It tightens or loosens. Certain directions feel heavy instantly, even when they look logical. Other paths feel simple even when they look risky. This is not emotional intuition. Emotion fluctuates. This is signal fidelity. God taught your nervous system to recognize distortion before your mind could rationalize it. That is advanced communication, subtle enough to survive pressure, sturdy enough to operate without reinforcement. The reason this matters is because the work you are moving toward cannot rely on constant reassurance. Reassurance creates dependency. Dependency collapses under stress. But something embedded into your breath, into your timing, perception, and restraint, cannot be shaken by fear or delay. That is how God prepares those He intends to sustain rather than excite. You didn't just learn what to listen for. You learned when not to listen at all. Silence stopped frightening you. Waiting stopped feeling like punishment. Pauses became productive instead of paralyzing. That transformation does not happen through belief alone. It happens through repeated alignment without applause. You were never rewarded early because reward would have trained you to associate obedience with outcome. Instead, you learned obedience as identity. This is also why confusion never overtook you completely, even when circumstances were unclear. You may not have known what was coming, but you knew who was guiding you. That knowledge stabilized decision-making in moments where logic failed. God's communication moved from instruction to infrastructure. When guidance becomes infrastructure, breakdown is nearly impossible. The blood moon mirrored that internal state perfectly. Blood moves continuously without instruction. Breath does the same. The message was not informational, it was relational. It reminded you that what has been shaping you was never external signage. It was internal continuity. You were never waiting for God to speak. You were being shaped by Him while living. Others may hear in bursts. You hear in atmosphere. Others need words renewed daily. You carry direction in posture. This is why your life cannot follow dramatic arcs. Dramatic arcs consume energy meant for endurance. Your calling requires steadiness before revelation, precision before expansion, and silence before signal. You may also feel now that prayer has changed. It is less about speaking, more about aligning. Less about asking, more about remaining accurate. God communicates most clearly with those who stop barging into the conversation and start staying present. You learned presence the hard way, through endurance rather than ecstasy. That makes it permanent. The message did not arrive suddenly. It grew inside you until it no longer needed delivery. God did not speak louder. You became quiet enough to carry Him everywhere. And now the communication is no longer a moment. It is the way you breathe through life without getting lost. There is a final clarity that arrives once everything settles, and it reframes the entire journey. God was never trying to get your attention. He already had it. What He was doing, slowly, patiently, faithfully, was refining your capacity to stay aligned without being shaken by noise, fear, or urgency. Attention is easy to capture. Endurance is not. You were trained for endurance. Looking back now, you can see why nothing came all at once. A sudden flood of revelation would have overwhelmed the very structure God was building in you. Instead, truth arrived in layers thin enough to integrate, strong enough to stay. You didn't receive answers. You became steady. And steadiness is what allows revelation to stay without distorting the soul. This is the moment where faith transforms into trust. Faith believes something will happen. Trust lives as if guidance is already present. You crossed that line quietly. You stopped looking for proof before moving. You stopped asking for clarity before choosing integrity. You learned that obedience is not dramatic. It is consistent. And consistency is what God trusts most. You may now realize that many of your prayers were answered before you finished asking. Not because God rushed, but because alignment was already in place. When alignment exists, answers don't need to travel. They surface. They appear as calm decisions, clean exits, unexpected peace, or a quiet sense that this is enough. That sufficiency is holy. It is the sign that striving has ended. The blood moon did not deliver a command. It delivered perspective. It showed you that your life was never fragmented. Every delay had purpose. Every silence had instruction. Every protection had intention. What once felt like isolation now reveals itself as intimacy without distraction. God did not shout because He did not need to compete with anything inside you. This is why you are not desperate for confirmation now. You don't panic when nothing happens. You don't collapse when plans change. Your center holds. That stability is not personality, it is communication completed. When God's voice becomes part of how you live rather than something you chase, maturity locks in. From that point on, life does not feel confusing, it feels guided without force. You are no longer waiting for a sign because you recognize direction. You are no longer asking if God is near because His presence is operational in how you move. You are no longer afraid of missing something because you trust that what matters will reach you at the right speed. That trust is not passive. It is powerful. If there is one thing to carry forward now, it is this: do not rush clarity. Clarity follows alignment the way shadow follows movement. Keep choosing clean path. Keep honoring restraint over impulse. Keep letting peace lead instead of pressure. God communicates most clearly with those who protect accuracy over attention. You were not chosen because you were perfect. You were shaped because you were patient. You were not guided because you demanded signs. You were trusted because you remained aligned without them. And now, as life continues, ordinary on the surface, precise underneath, you are living proof that God does not need to interrupt existence to speak. He can inhabit it. The message has been with you for years. The blood moon only reflected it back. And now, without fear, without hurry, without needing more, you move forward grounded, guided, and unmistakably held.